Our subject for today is a foundation for hope and self-confidence. And actually, these two, hope and self-confidence, are very much related. Hope having to do more with our attitude towards the future, and self-confidence dealing more with how we were going to deal with the now and the present. So this first presentation will be on the idea of a foundation for hope. And let's begin with a general definition of hope. Hope is an optimistic state of mind that is based on an expectation of favorable outcomes with respect to events, circumstances, and conditions in one's life and the world at large. Now, the key phrase there is an optimistic state of mind. And since our state of mind is very much connected with the ideas that we hold, a foundation for hope or a foundation for a lack of hope must be found in the ideas that we hold. Ideas can give us a foundation for work and hope for the future, a basis for thought and action. Or they can be a foundation for a lack of hope, fear, and despair. Ideas are of such paramount importance because they influence our feelings, our desires, our will, our actions, and ultimately our destiny. As Plato said, ideas rule the world. So we'll begin with an exploration of the ideas held by some that may contribute to a lack of hope. The first idea is that God is separate from life, the universe, and man. And only God is holy. Everything else lacks that holiness and either can be holy through the grace of this outside God or through faith. But it leads to an idea of a lack of hope, because if God is the only holy being, then the human being is inherently sinful or weak. And certainly, if one would look around the world, they would see plenty of examples of the selfishness, weakness, and sinfulness of humanity to support their idea about God being outside and holy and the creator of this life, universe, and man. Then there is, in a sense, the opposite idea, that there is no God, there is no spirit, there is no soul, just this physical stuff. And that becomes a basis for a lack of hope. Because if all we are stuff, when the body dies, there is nothing else. There is no reason for us to expect any accountability or an afterlife. Rather, the only thing that's important is what goes on now. And ultimately, that's going to be brought to an end by death. So it certainly gives us no hope for our future. The third idea is that if all we are is this stuff, we can use it any way we want to please ourselves, to give us comfort, and we don't have to worry about what happens to others. All that matters is how we use this stuff that we are made of, that the world is made of. And that certainly leads to a lack of hope, because we see around us human beings selfishly using this stuff. So what hope is there that humanity will improve, but will only continue to be selfish and creating problems for themselves and nature? So selfishness and the sense of separateness are the ideas that develop from these ideas that God is separate, that we are just stuff, and that we can use this stuff any way we want. And this sense of selfishness and separateness is the cause of all misery and lack of hope. The other thing we might mention is that fear and despair stifle hope. And if we believe that we are inherently sinful and separate from God, if we believe that we are inherently stuff, and at the end of our lives there's nothing else, and if we believe we can use this stuff in any way we want, we are only left with fear and despair from the actions that result from others, or fear and despair about the ultimate outcome of our lives. On the other hand, we have Theosophy. Theosophy is a very optimistic philosophy. Theosophy acknowledges the existence of good and evil, harmony and disharmony, love and hate. But while acknowledging it, it says ultimately good wins out over evil. Harmony wins out over disharmony, and love wins out over hate. So what are some theosophical ideas that give us a foundation for hope for the future? The first idea is that God is not a separate being, not separate from us, not separate from life. In fact, God is not even a being, because any being we can imagine is limited in time, in space, and condition. This ultimate source or God idea presented is that God, or the deific essence, is within everything and everyone. It is everywhere. All are one and interconnected, united in their divine essence with this one deific source. And this one essence, divine essence that is everywhere in all beings, is the basis of universal brotherhood. So, being that this idea encourages the notion that humanity is divine in essence, as all beings are, that we are essentially indestructible, immortal in essence, that we are all united in one brotherhood, interconnected. This gives us a foundation of hope for the future. The second idea is that of law, the law of karma, cause and effect, action and reaction. The idea that every cause that has an effect, that effect comes back to the point of origin, so that we create for ourselves, and what we create comes back to us for good or ill. Along with the law of karma, there is the idea of reincarnation. We are not just physical beings made of stuff. We are spiritual beings, immortal beings in essence. And the body in any one life that the spiritual being incarnates is not accidental. But the body, the circumstances, the conditions are the results, or the karmic results of the actions, thoughts, feelings, desires that we've held in the past. So these two, karma and reincarnation, are doctrines of hope and doctrines of responsibility. Because once we realize that, we understand that once we act, there is no force, there is no being in the universe that can counteract or prevent the fruitful results of our actions, unless we ourselves act in such a way to interfere or to set up obstructive causes. So that is the responsibility aspect of this. The fourth idea is that of evolution. Not just evolution for human beings, but for every being. Every human being, every being in nature is evolving, gaining experience, power, understanding. There is not just a physical evolution, but an evolution of our desire, our feeling, our mental nature, our intuitional nature, our discriminating power. And all this together provides us with a better instrument to deal with the present and a more hopeful attitude about the future. Because the universal idea of the evolution of all beings brings to mind the ideal and fact of human perfectibility. We have before us the idea of the masters, the perfected human beings, of which there are many examples in history. And every one of them, whether we're speaking of Jesus, Buddha, Krishna, Muhammad, Moses, Lao Tzu, Confucius, every one of them is pointed to a path and the opportunity for any human being to become as they, perhaps even greater in the course of evolution. So this idea is a foundation for hope, not only for ourselves, but for all beings. This idea of evolution is the foundation of optimism and hope. Because evolution, progress is inevitable. It is the direction of life. It gives us a goal and purpose. And wherever we are, we can be assured that through this evolutionary process, it is inevitable that we would get better and best, as Buddha would say. Now, there are problems, there are difficulties along the way, because we are continuously having experience and improving our intelligence, our desire, our ideas, our discrimination. But as they get better, our opportunities get better, our experiences get better, and things will always work out for the better. We add to this the idea that through evolution, we have an opportunity to gain self-knowledge, soul wisdom, that we are immortal, incarnating beings. And once we understand that nature, that true nature, that nothing can destroy us or ultimately hold us back, or prevent the use of our creative powers of thought and feeling, we have a firm foundation for hope. In our next presentation, our panelist will talk about these same ideas, but see as how they are a foundation for self-confidence.
Of self-confidence, when we think about that self-confidence, that foundation is greatly rooted in the present, in the now. So how does that compare to what the general population, what the masses of Western thinkers might hold to be true? You've heard universally an overview of some of the points of view available in popular culture. And we know that, yes, indeed, there's been 2,000 years or more of a veil of the concepts of original sin, vicarious atonement, sempiternity, that veil has overlaid some of the mind powers, some of the points of view in use among the collective of humanity. We also, as you just heard, we also have the ability to observe that there's a secular, a materialistic or scientific reaction to that point of view. There's a whole range. And when it comes to self-confidence, in that reaction to that 2,000-year process or veiling, we do see a tendency among some, or many perhaps, to focus on the persona, to see self-confidence as pride, as self-esteem. We can observe that logic can build self-esteem and arrogance, a lofty sense of independence and separateness, an exhibition of selfishness to the nth degree. Among those who are more benign thinkers, that logic can root self-confidence in personal accomplishments, in self-assurance arising from an appreciation in the personality, in the persona, an appreciation of that unique blend of abilities or qualities. So we would like to turn for a moment to the common observation of self-confidence as it shows up in the childlike state. And we know that in the Voice of the Silence, we're invited to revisit the childlike state as students of Theosophy. In the toddler, we see confidence as self-reliance, a feeling, an intuition, maybe even an instinct in the toddler, that one can rely on someone or something. There's a firm trust and a state of feeling that there's really certain truth. We see this in the toddler as they learn to sit, to crawl, to stand, to cruise along the edge of tabletops, and finally to walk and to run. And we can observe in the toddler state patience, courage, optimism, desire, will, a vibrant form of pure confidence, beyond labels, beyond words, really. It's just an uprising of intuition and instinct involved together. So if we keep that reality that we can see of self-confidence, let's turn to the Theosophical foundation for self-confidence. And the first thing that comes to mind, of course, is the first fundamental, and our invitation to consider the true nature of self. In fact, that's one of the bases for the declaration of ULT, isn't it? As an eternal ray of the absolute, as a ray that has all powers of great nature exhibited in potential within it. We see the self defined theosophically as spiritual man, as soul. And we're aware, of course, of the limits in animal man, in the lower aspects of soul. We're aware that there's instinct in the toddler that will hopefully eventually bloom into full intuition as in a spiritualized man, a sense of perfectibility, a sense of potential. And the sages across time, across cultures, places, across all eras of time immemorial, have taught that there's self in all capital letters, this divine ray coming from the absolute, the deific force, if you will. There is a notion of self that the self-conscious entity can use as a basis, self with a capital S alone, kind of a half step of mind and spirit, sensing, observing, watching, as daily life proceeds, as moment by moment we live in the present. And then we know, of course, the level of consciousness of self with all lowercase letters. Self is a basis of attitude, motive, point of view from the personality or persona. In that degree, in that array of development, we also can observe change and motive, if you will, from the selfish, profoundly particularized, the illusion of separateness from all else, through degrees of self-awareness or self-centeredness, until finally a state of selflessness can be accomplished. But even in that selflessness, we find a confidence, an impressed, intuition-based, fully driven force of spirit in matter, spirit above matter. In the Voice of the Silence, we have a teaching that says this: saith the great law, in order to become the knower of all self, that supreme level of self-confidence, that universal one self, if you will, thou hast first of self with a capital S to be the knower. So as thinkers, we need first to become the watchers, aware that there is an eternal point of view that can oversee moment by moment any of the experiences and events that karma may bring. And there's a process. To reach the knowledge of the self with all capitals, thou hast to give up the watchfulness to non-being. In other words, give up the lower aspects of self-consciousness and rest in the eternal, rest between the wings of the symbols of eternal age and divinity across time in the soul, in spirit. And so with patience as a toddler would have, we know the second fundamental is a basis, a firm foundation for self-confidence in cycles and periodicity, cause and effect. We are told to trust in the law, absolute divine justice, compassionate, infinite opportunities to grow into full enlightenment through the course of lives, through the lives that we're using in our lower vehicles, for the lives all around us, every single point of consciousness in manifestation. The Gita invites us to raise the lower self by that watchful higher self, to act as seemeth best to thee. So we're invited in that cycle of periodicity, as events and experiences come to us, to use free will, to have the confidence that we can use that free will to choose as best we can, moment to moment, and that the true power, that highest, loftiest spiritual self-confidence, is in the pause where we can retreat from the persona, retreat from the event or the experience, and center ourselves in the spiritual observer. So we work fundamentally in evolution, independently it would seem, but as dynamos who can impress and elevate all life if our desires, if our will, if our imagination, if our thought process is centered in the foundation for true self-reliance. Brave, confident, self-devised, self-fulfilled, with the intent, the growth into the ideal will come about. In many ways, in terms of evolution, as independent, free-seeking thinkers, aren't we like the sailors who are in the ocean in a tiny sunfish sailboat? That sailor may be aware and experienced, may be skilled in the mechanics of the little tiny boat, and they may be very firm in a conviction that as sailors of their own fate, they have concentration. But true wisdom for that sailor in that tiny little boat is the self-knowledge that above and beyond what the persona can do, what the little boat can do, is something far more universal. There are the forces of great nature, the wind, the tides, the forces of other entities, perhaps even huge fish that might be under the ocean's surface, the currents, the rain, all of these conditions that might come psychically in cycles extrinsically to the thinker. That sailor has to, through daily effort, remain a firm, mindful person, but flexible in the face of all changes that nature, that karma might provide. So how do we do that in daily effort? How do we have a foundation of the true self-confidence to maintain a firm attitude in the face of all challenges? Well, we pursue the creation and maintenance of a clean, heartfelt source of motives. We imagine the ability, we bring into reality, realize that there is true soul wisdom, and that soul wisdom can impact and overcome any head learning that life may have engendered. That we can practice self-restraint and fearlessness moment by moment. That we can generate the notion and maintain the endeavor to make theosophy a true living power in life, moment by moment. So, ethics, applied eternal verities, morality, the effort, an ongoing effort to maintain awareness in the moment, to be present 24/7. That is the life's meditation. That is the Dharma of the human state. And it's a self-fulfilling prophecy, isn't it? How we identify ourselves, how we create the image of self, and how we maintain the infinite range of confidence is the creative power. Hypothetically, let's say that the universe speaks. As we become aware of day after day existence, and we begin to reflect on our use of motive and what were our reactions, we may begin to see patterns. And hypothetically, we may say, I had all those little opportunities to prevent panic, and I indulged in some of them. Then came a time when I finally had the ability to say, geez, I feel panic, but I'm not panic. Only perhaps hypothetically to have yet another event knock us right off our pins. And it seems like the persona, the lower personality, loses all control and becomes completely enmeshed in a state of panic in some event that might come about. So what's key? Key would be habitual, planned, seated periods of meditation. We can look to Patanjali, to the writings of Mr. Judge and letters that have helped me. We can sit for meditation and practice the shaving process. We can study ourself and our use of self-confidence without condemnation, just with an observation of what was, is, and what can be with the right use of thought and identification of self-confidence. But probably the most overriding, powerful effort that we can make, like that toddler, moment by moment, who takes on every effort without any coloration of, geez, I failed, I fell again. We can practice more mundane 24/7, but such powerful meditation in the life's meditation. The power is in the pause before we speak, before we act. We can count to 10 in all events. We can turn to breath work. We might even develop a little mantra for ourselves that can anchor us moment to moment and reestablish true self-confidence. In the Key to Theosophy, we read about will prayer and how that becomes such a powerful force moment to moment in a self-confident life. And ultimately, moment by moment, in the present, we can consider how would the ideal human dynamo, the Mahatma, the master, use leisure time? How would that one design coping mechanisms, no matter what karma brings? And so, as the Gita tells us, we can choose wisely and with every confidence that each failure is a success as long as we look at the failure and then try again.